First of all, before I get too started here, I want to encourage those of you who want to use the chat feature during the sermon. In a perfect world, you'd talk something about the sermon or what I'm saying. But honestly, we're going to be talking a lot during Lent this year about relationships. And chat is one way to build relationships, even if it's just making snide remarks about things that I'm saying or what's going on in the world. This is relationships. So, if you're wondering about people using chat, doesn't bother me anyway. So, deep in the sea, the problem with this theme for me is that it's not really very biblical. If you've ever seen a map of Israel, you'll know that the one whole coast is a coast. Right, there's the big Mediterranean Sea right there. And if you've ever been there, there's great beaches, nice weather, a nice place to be. But for people who lived right beside the Mediterranean Sea, the people of Israel actually had really no love of water. They were basically like us. They were hill country folks. And this is for good historical reasons, because throughout most of Israel's history, the Mediterranean coast was under the control of somebody else. Right, so in the really early days, it was the Egyptians, and then like during David's time, it was the Philistines, and then soon after that, Syria, or the Assyrians or the Babylonians or somebody else always controlled that, because that was where the trade routes were, and that was where they got to tax the fishing and stuff like that. So the Bible really had few positive things to say about the sea. Right, the sea is a place of chaos. Right? The Bible talks about the great sea monsters. And so there's a sense of danger that accompanies large bodies of water. We see that in places like the creation story, right, which talks about the chaos out there, all right, and you separate the sea from the dry land, and the dry land is the safe place. So we see this in the Jonah story, where you go out on the sea, and what happens? Well, you get tossed overboard and you get swallowed by a fish, right? So right, it's not a place you want to go. And so when the Bible talks about the sea or deep water, it's actually more likely to talk about being rescued from this than being called to it, right? So the psalm that Edith read this morning, Psalm 130, out of the depths I cry to you, O God, rescue me. Right? And obviously one of the key stories in all of this is the story of Noah, right, and the ark. Because it's a story about water. Oh no, and water is frightening. Water kills, right? So Noah's, it's a watershed story, right? It's a story that's important to people, because the question often asked is, do you believe this? Do you believe this is an event that happened? We're going to slide past that this morning, right? And recognize that this is also a fear of the water story, right? Deep in the sea is not somewhere you want to be in the Noah story, right? And so the story of the rainbow that Edith read for us is a story about about this not happening anymore. No more deep sea, right? We get to be on dry land. And the part of the story that we want to look at is actually right at the beginning of the story, in chapter 6, verse 9, where it talks about Noah, that the world is a mess. The world is full of violence and chaos, and it's horrible. And then there's Noah, and Noah is different. And so chapter 6, verse 9 says, Noah was a righteous man. He was blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, right? Considered right and blameless. The Hebrew word here, tamim, means he's in right relationship. He's in right relationship with the people around him. He's in right relationship with God. And this word is often used in contrast. Right? There's the tamim, there's the people in right relationship, and then there's the wicked, right? So it's a contrast. And the key phrase is that Noah walked. And this is how I think Noah managed to be in right relationship, even in the middle of this wicked world. And I'm going to assume for this morning, Noah walked with God is a metaphor, right? That Noah didn't actually literally walk beside God, although who knows, right? But it's such a great picture, because it's a picture we can easily relate to, right? So really about for a walk in the woods, sort of going for a walk with God, that way, right? It's a calm place. It's relaxing, and there's woods, and it's beautiful. And even when it's cold, right? I, I actually went for a walk one time at 40 below. Um, and it was just like so peaceful, right? Because the air just, it's just so it was peaceful. And or most of you is going to be the idea of like going for a walk along the beach, right? And right, there's this famous story of like the footsteps right in the sand and going for a walk with Jesus on the beach, right? Or like as a prairie person, right, there's the prairies. And I actually tend not to think about walking with God in the prairies. I tend to think about running with God because when I see prairies in front of me, I'm going to go for a run, right? But the problem with any of these images is that they limit God to the easy stuff, right? Anybody can go for through the woods or down the beach, these perfect kind of situations. The goal, I think, is to be able to walk with God down the street, right? Down the street of the town with all the noise and the chaos and the bustle and the honking cars and the and stuff. When you can walk there with God, then you've achieved something, right? Can you walk into your house with God and into the chaos that is most of our lives? Can we do that? Right? The trick is to be able to walk into a difficult situation with God. Remember that Noah walked with God in the middle of this corrupt and sinful generation that he lives in. And all of the stuff that's going on, even when he's the only righteous person he knows, Noah manages to walk with God. And so this is where it counts. This is where it matters, right? Because this is a place that God, first of all, can actually do something really important inside of you, right? Can God transform you in those situations to continue to be a righteous, a person in good relationship, even in those situations? And can God also work through you in those situations to transform the world around you? Now, this is not to say that walking with God through the woods is a bad idea, right? Because sometimes we need a break. Sometimes we need a respite. We need this time away, right? And walking with God in those calm and peaceful situations is also good practice. And we need those times as well, right? It's like if you're learning a new musical instrument, right? And so, many of you in middle school or, as kids, you learn to play this instrument, but you didn't learn to play it by standing on the stage and performing, right? You learned it by, right, being alone by yourself and practicing where it's easy, where there's no pressure at all, so that when you get to a place where there is some pressure, right, you can do it because you know what you're doing, right? So that's the point of walking with God in the woods, is to get you ready, right? You've practiced this already, you've done this. And so that when you get right into the tough situations, right, you know how to do this already. The story of Jesus and his baptism is a story of Jesus in actually two relationships. So it talks about Jesus' relationship to God, and it talks about Jesus' relationship to John the Baptist, right? And the two go together. That in some ways we can say that Jesus went to John the Baptist to find God, or at least to strengthen his relationship with God. Jesus supposedly could have baptized himself, right? All you need is a body of water, and there's those here and there around Israel, right? And so, right, and that's all you need, right? You go in the water, you come out, you've been baptized. But Jesus chooses to go to John to be baptized. So there's something about that relationship, right? Or Jesus could have skipped the whole baptism thing entirely and just gone straight into the wilderness, but he doesn't choose that either. The end of the story also says that Jesus went to Galilee after John was arrested, which means that before John was arrested, right? So between Jesus goes to the wilderness and when John was arrested, Jesus was apparently with John before that. This is a Jesus the student picture, right? which is again one form of relationship. The relationship that Jesus has with God is where God speaks to Jesus and says, "You are my beloved, with you I am well pleased." And I always like the fact that this story is at the beginning. This isn't like after Jesus does all of this stuff. Then God says, "Okay, now I am well pleased with you." This is actually where Jesus started and where we start. We start with God being pleased with us. And God could have said lots of stuff to Jesus. God could have said, "Hey, look, you are my child. With you I am well pleased for now, but we'll see how it goes." Right? Or God could have said, "You are my son, make me proud." Right? So, no pressure here, Jesus, at all, right? Or God could have said, "You are my child, good luck, kid." Right? So there's all, right? It's helpful to imagine all of the other less helpful things that God could have said to understand how helpful this is as a place to begin. This Lent, we're going to be using various images and metaphors to invite you into a deeper relationship with God. And I invite you to take advantage of the pandemic insofar as it's, mostly a horrible thing, but not completely a horrible thing, right? To work on this. And I think, right, this is a good time to work on this, either because suddenly you're stuck at home and you do have lots of time, or because your life is really in chaos right now and you really need it. And either of those is a good reason to work on your relationship with God. Now, of course, one of the realities of the relationship with God, like any relationship, is that it takes time. And I could say something like, well, you need to make time. But last time I checked, you can't really do that there's 24 hours in a day, and you really can't manufacture any more than that. I'm sure many of you, right, who are overwhelmed with life right now would really like to be able to make time. Doesn't work, right? Or I could say, well, you need to find time, but the same reality applies. There is so and so much time. It's not like there's any like hiding underneath your desk or something like that. You got the time you've got. That's all there is, right? And so the best maybe you can manage if you're overwhelmed is to squeeze it in, right? So think about speed dating with God, right? Or maybe think about putting a quick Facebook comment on God's page, right? And the goal, of course, is to always walk with God, to always be in relationship with God. But we start small, right? Just like anything. Someone has once said that there are two basic prayers, right? And the first is, "Help me, help me, help me." And the second one is, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Right? So here we have two places where you can start your relationship, where you can increase your relationship with God in like 2.5 seconds, right? Help me, help me, help me. There it is, right? And then you move on from there. So it takes time, but you can squeeze it in, 2.5 seconds. The second thing you need to take is companions. And of course, right, that's what I do for a living. So I always start by recommending the Bible. And it's important to recognize that the Bible is an ancient book, and it's often confusing, and it's often difficult to read. And it can still be helpful. But there are lots of other books out there that you can read as well, in addition to the Bible. Right? There's books on developing a relationship with God, or books that simply by their existence, by the way they're written, help you develop this relationship. Or if you're not, a reading sort of person, there's podcasts, there's lots and lots of companions out there you can take with you. And in addition to that, there are guides, right? There are people out there whose job it is to help you with your relationship with God, right? There are people called spiritual advisors and counselors and things like that. So there are people who want to walk with you into a deeper relationship with God. And that's such a great thing. It's important to understand that this is a learning process because it's not an obvious thing. You have no other relationship that is like your relationship with God. Okay? I mentioned before the idea of like dropping a note onto God's Facebook page. But truthfully, if you drop a note onto my Facebook page, I'm probably going to respond in really sort of obvious ways. Right? God doesn't do that. Right? Even if you could text God, God tends not to text back. in sort of clear, obvious text. So there's something very different about this relationship, right? Which is, again, why we need to start small steps, doing it slowly, right? This week, as part of our relationship with each other, many of us shared our favorite band, right? Or like the kind of music we listened to when we were younger. And I'm sure many of you had this experience where you really wanted to learn how to play a particular guitar solo, that there was some riff somewhere that you just really wanted to be able to play that one. And maybe you got yourself a guitar and you found a teacher and you went to the teacher and say, I want to play this riff from this band, this opening, right, to this song. I want to be able to play that. And your teacher goes, okay, well, let's start. Here's how you hold a pick correctly. You're going to put it here. And you go, no, I don't want to learn to hold a pick correctly. I want to play this riff from the guitar. I want to play it like behind my head, because that's a really cool way to do this, right? And the teacher goes, okay, now here's how you hold a pick correctly, because this is where you start, right? And you're never going to get to this. Actually, you're probably never going to get to that anyway, but you're never going to get to that until you do this, right? We start small. So why? Why should you do that? And the answer is, first of all, you got to take the word should out of there as much as you possibly can, right? When you hear yourself saying should, there should be a little bell, should be, right? A little bell going off in your head going, no, I don't want to do that. Right? Does this bring me joy? What is, and the problem with a relationship with God is that there's no single because. There are so many possible answers. There are so many good reasons to do this. And so in a lot of ways, you have to find your own because. And even then, I think it's important to be careful, because it really isn't a goal-oriented activity. A relationship with anybody isn't so much a goal-oriented activity. Think of this more as a journey of discovery. You are going for a walk with God. You're not sure where you're going to get to. Think of it more as wandering with God, or going on a journey and taking God along. But again, it's not like, well, I'm going to go to this place and then this place and then this place, and I'm going to take God along. It's much I'm going to head generally south and, well, see where it takes us. So this is my encouragement this week, to carve out some time, to squeeze in some time, and to work on your relationship with God. So now we're going to pop out to our breakout rooms. And I invite you, if you're feeling brave enough, to share something with the people in your group that has worked for you, something that has helped you in your relationship with God. Philip, take us away.